U.S. government officials, meaning our own government officials, they're not working on your tax dollars, they're working on money from the United Nations, according to this. And the finding is raising concerns over, well, the independence of officials who've been receiving that money, and also to what extent the funding has influenced their policies, especially on climate initiatives, which are one of the big pushes of this foundation. Let me show you. Now, here, this is, it says, the United Nations Foundation, a nonprofit foundation in the formed in the 1990s to support global UN initiatives, is quietly fueling climate change policies in top Democratic state government offices nationwide. Fox News Digital has learned. It says the Washington, D.C. based organization, which was created to work closely with the United Nations, houses the UN Climate Alliance, a coalition of Democrat-led states launched to coordinate environmental policy after former President Donald Trump withdrew from the UN Paris Climate Accords. And notes that as part of the initiative, the United Nations Foundation has wired millions of dollars to state governors and agencies, in many cases even funding state officials' salaries. Now, this suggests
Next, talking about enjoying snacks during the Super Bowl.
And as an ice cream lover, what makes me the most angry is that ice cream cartons have actually shrunk in size, but not in price. I've had enough of what they call shrinkflation.
Republicans from the House Judiciary Committee commented, saying Joe Biden complains about shrinkflation, forgetting that he's the cause. Conservative think tank The Heritage Foundation says, don't let President Biden gaslight you. Shrinkflation is not the problem, Bidenomics is. The White House on Monday defended the video.
He's called on large corporations to pass their savings on to hardworking Americans. That's what we're doing.
Biden also made the decision to skip a Super Bowl Sunday TV interview. That's despite the fact that he would have had the unique chance to connect with millions of football and Taylor Swift fans at the same time. On Monday, a reporter asked why Biden didn't do the interview.
We've talked about this. We believe that it is an important, obviously, tradition to watch the Super Bowl, and we think there are different ways to communicate with the American people.
And a super PAC
through TikTok, Chinese app
during the Super Bowl halftime.
Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
I like this one.
Some people criticized the candidate for using clips, slogans, and images from John F. Kennedy's
I wouldn't apologize for shit.
RFK's cousin, Bobby Shriver, denounced the use of a photo of his mother, who is John F. Kennedy's sister. He also criticized what he called RFK Jr.'s deadly healthcare views and said respect for science, vaccines, and healthcare equity were in his mother's DNA. Kennedy later apologized, saying he's sorry the advertisement caused anyone in his family pain. He said the ad
family
was
member
okay. By the American
Outsiders,
Value Super
screw
PAC
you.
without any involvement or approval from his campaign. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
Last year, and so far this year as well. Here with us to discuss what this means for unemployment, the economy, and ultimately the state of journalism is Joel Griffith of the Heritage Foundation. Joel Griffith, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Of course, Joel, more than 20,000 U.S. based tech employees, tech workers, have lost their jobs so far this year. We're only in February, and that's on top of 191,000 workers laid off last year. What are the factors playing into these job losses, and what story does it sort of tell in terms of the types of jobs being lost or gained into the broader economy?
Well, as you mentioned, we lost close to 200,000 tech jobs through layoffs last year. That was an acceleration from the prior year. And now we're on track this year to possibly be at $240,000 lost throughout the entirety of the year. Some of these tech firms have laid off upwards of 30% of their total workforce. And this is ranging from Amazon layoffs all the way up to a lot of smaller companies that most of us aren't familiar with by name. But this bears testament to a bigger story overall in the jobs market, despite the headlines that we see
and
over
the
the
inflation
last few months of new jobs being added. If you look at the total number of full-time jobs, so we've actually lost more than 1 million full-time jobs over the past 9 months or so. And the reason why we see the total number of jobs increasing Well, that's because we have seen a lot of folks taking on additional part-time work to deal with the inflation crisis.
Joel, we're in the media business, obviously. We're seeing that the
Selling
media
pay off their
landscape
credit
is taking
card.
a significant hit as well with, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, cutting, I think, 20% of its staff, not all journalists, but a significant amount. What does this mean, I guess, for the quality of journalism and the coverage of important issues that are facing us right now?
Well, we've seen some other layoffs too. I mean, look at Sports Illustrated over the last few weeks. They've laid off pretty much their entire staff, a publication that has been around for decades. So yes, this is a severe problem, not just affecting the broader tech sector, but media as well, and even retail is being hit. I do think there is a hunger for real journalism at the same time that we've seen Sports Illustrated, which became woke, and the LA Times, which has been far from unbiased for many years. We see entities like Epic News at record circulation, and we see far more objective publications like Wall Street Journal doing quite well also.
I must say, shameless plug, you are right. The Epoch Times, we're blessed to say that we are continuing to grow in this tough time. How many jobs would you say that we're talking about here and in general have been victim to the development of artificial intelligence, AI? And what do these cuts mean that we've been talking about for, in terms of the unemployment numbers and the economy as a whole?
Well, I think that the danger of layoffs related to AI have been overblown, and really to the extent that AI will help all of us do our jobs more productively in the future. Long term, AI promises to help us all be more productive, which means that all of us who do have jobs will actually be able to earn more to better our standard of living. Now, every time that we see massive technological breakthroughs, there are those that warn this is going to place people out of work longer term. But time and time again, we have seen, not just over the past few decades, but over the centuries, that as we accelerate our ability to produce more with less, the overall population does better as well, not just the early investors in that new technology.
Joel Griffith, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Intended to fight money launderers. In January, the Epoch Times reported on allegations of pervasive financial surveillance.
The report said that the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, circulated certain keywords to bank to flag private transactions. FinCEN is the Treasury Department's financial crime fighting unit. The unit also allegedly instructed banks to look for the purchase of religious texts and subscriptions to media containing extremist views.
A few days ago, the Office of Legislative Affairs partially confirmed those reports. An official said FinCEN provided banks with keywords like MAGA, Trump, or storm the Capitol to track down January 6 protesters.
Many are criticizing the controversial technique, calling it unwarranted financial surveillance. Congressman Jim Jordan accuses the Biden administration of disregarding Americans' fundamental civil liberties. And the economy is strong, so says the White House and some media outlets. Earlier, I spoke with Jeffrey Tucker, president of the Brownstone Institute and author of Liberty or Lockdown. He recently wrote an Epoch Times article titled The Lie of the Strong Economy. Jeffrey, great to see you again. Now, let's talk about expectations versus reality. How are Americans currently viewing the job economy?
The way people are viewing the job economy and the economy in general is quite dreary. People don't like what's going on. They have a sense that things aren't quite right, that they're poorer than they used to be, and they're not optimistic about the future. And this fact is driving, certain people in Washington crazy. And so all the corporate media is filled with stories about, well, wait a minute, everything's great. The GDP, inflation, the jobs numbers, this is a strong economy. Why is everybody so upset? So the purpose of my article was to explain the difference between what they're claiming and what people are actually experiencing.
Now, the White House announced that job gains continued with a strong pace in 2023, and although not as fast as 2021 or 2022, and that GDP came out stronger than expected a year ago. But in your article titled "The Lie of the Strong Economy," you said that costs for Americans are still inflated. Can you break that down for us?
The most recent data I was looking at this morning shows sticky prices coming in at 5.3%. I mean, that is far higher than the target. I mean, the target is 2%, so it's still going up by the latest data. And even that data is highly manipulated because of the way they weight the CPI. The CPI doesn't exist in reality. It's just an index number, so which means that you take all the possible prices and divide it by the number of prices, and then you weight things according to their importance. And what's happening is that this weighted average is being skewed by strange statistical tricks. For example, I use the example in my article of health insurance premiums, which they claim have gone down by 37% between 2022 and 2023. That is simply not true. I don't have time here to explain how they come up with this cockamamie conclusion, but it's just true. And the same thing is the case with jobs numbers. There are two sources of jobs numbers. One's called the Establishment Survey. The other is called the Household Survey. The Establishment Survey is wildly inaccurate, guilty of double and triple counting of jobs. That is the one they report, while they don't report the Household Survey.
In your article, you mentioned that the civilian labor force for jobs actually dropped by about 175,000 from December to January. Now, I wanted to talk to you about, the Pew Research finds that only a third of Americans approve of President Joe Biden's job performance. What actions are needed by the current or next administration to reverse this outlook and improve the job outlook?
Oh, that's a big question. There's so many reforms that need to be undertaken. We need to get the bureaucracy off the economic functioning, restore free enterprise and consumer choice. We need to stabilize the dollar and cut the budget, and get the Federal Reserve to stop mucking around with the interest rates. There's so many reforms that we need. Dramatic healthcare reform. There's so many things that need to be done, but Washington's doing exactly the opposite. I mean, the Biden administration is pushing for contractors to be defined as full-time employees, which is going to just increase the cost of business and lead to more firings. We're already seeing vast numbers of firings. And just to be clear, the claim that there's job creation, this is not job creation. This is people getting a second and a third job. That's why multiple job holders are at record numbers right now. This whole trajectory we're on is catastrophic, and we desperately need dramatic and huge reforms in every aspect of economic policy in this country.
No tomorrow, or hey buddy, remember who's paying you. I would call that political bribery. And I mean, of course, the practice of this nature is generally legal, if we call it lobbying, but I believe there are some loopholes in our political system that are allowing public officials to be bought off by, organizations and even compromised by money that have strings attached. And I think it's fairly well understood that this money often does have strings attached. And, in light of all this, recent files that came out, also, this is another story, we're now seeing that Amazon was censoring books, and especially those related to searches for things like vaccines, because, of pressure from the Biden administration, it turns out. And of course, this is raising some other issues, because if the company, Amazon, of course, one of the main marketplaces online, was receiving pressure to censor books, right, book censorship, under the pressure from the White House, that, of course, raises questions of whether it is a violation of the First Amendment. Was it a violation of the U.S. Constitution if the government is pressuring a private enterprise to do it on their behalf? Well, I'll be talking more about these Amazon files that are now coming out and the censorship happening. That'll be only on Epoch TV, EPOCHTV.com.
On Sunday during the Super Bowl. Here's the president's first post.
This is insane.
Two great quarterbacks, hard to decide. But if I didn't say I was for the Eagles, then I'd be sleeping alone. My wife's a Philly girl.
Game or commercials?
Game.
Game or halftime show?
Game.
Jason Kelce or Travis Kelce?
Mama Kelce. And she makes great chocolate chip cookies.
Deviously plotting to rig the season so the Chiefs would make the Super Bowl, or the Chiefs just being a good football team?
I get in trouble if I told you.
Trump or Biden?
Are you kidding? Biden.
The president's TikTok is significant because TikTok is owned by a Chinese company connected to the Chinese Communist Party. Both lawmakers and government officials say it's a safety threat to the United States. FBI Director Christopher Wray says the Chinese regime uses it to collect data on Americans, spy on Americans, and manipulate young people. This year's Super Bowl ads from two presidential candidates.
Northern border with Canada. A record number of illegal border crossings happened along the U.S.-Canada border in 2023, according to the New York Times. U.S. officials at the northern border reported over 190,000 encounters with illegal immigrants in 2023. That's 40% more than the year before.
There were also over 12,000 illegal immigrant arrests that year. That's over 240% more than the year before. Just in the last 4 months, Border Patrol apprehended people from 55 countries.
Many illegal immigrants who want to enter the U.S. choose to go through Canada because Canada doesn't have a visa requirement for travelers from Mexico.
Many of the illegal immigrants try to enter New York, Vermont, or New Hampshire from Canada on foot. Authorities in Tennessee are looking for a man accused of shooting and killing a sheriff's deputy and injuring another. A reward for information leading to the arrest of Kenneth DeHart has now grown to more than $100,000. The deadly encounter happening Thursday following a traffic stop in Maryville, 30 miles west of Gatlinburg. Authorities say DeHart shot and killed Deputy Greg McCowan.
A second officer was injured after returning fire. She was treated at a hospital and released. DeHart is wanted on warrants for first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and being a felon in possession of a firearm.
Authorities say DeHart is considered armed and dangerous.
And in Oklahoma.
Today they were then as well. But he's telling a story, and frankly, look, Donald Trump is not a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. He doesn't talk like a traditional politician. And we've already been through this now. You'd think people would have figured it out by now.
Rubio said Trump was describing how, as president, he used leverage to get countries to step up and become more active in NATO. And next, we have political strategist and former congressional candidate Raven Harrison joining us to offer insight into presidential primary campaigns on both sides as the race ramps up with 2 weeks till South Carolina's primary. Raven, welcome. Great to have you back. Now, Haley's campaign said she didn't spend a day or a dollar in Nevada and that she's focusing on her home state. How important is South Carolina for Haley, and what factors could influence the outcome there?
Thank you for having me. Yes, it is very important. She was the governor of that state, and they were really looking to her to lead, but she's trailing in those polls. It's kind of split dynamic. Senator Tim Scott has endorsed President Trump, but the governor, Sununu, is going with Nikki Haley. So you've got some polarization, but it's very important that she send a strong signal from her home market.
Now, Trump's attacks on Haley have intensified recently, even to include her husband. How are these comments likely to sit with voters, do you think?
It's a mixed bag. The ones who like the brassness and the boldness of Trump are taking that in the same vein. The ones who like to pick apart his dialogue and say it's too harsh, it's too strong, it's too over the top, or using that as fuel for the fire. But at the end of the day, it's where's the merit in attacks? She's launching attacks, he's launching attacks.
But Biden's stupidity is okay.
And the Biden camp is taking full advantage of the two Republican heavyweights swinging at each other.
Right. How does that play into it? Because both Haley and Trump are kind of fighting each other and Biden at the same time. So this is an extra dynamic at play here.
Well, we're going to play the sound and get your reaction.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
So, Cash, we obviously try to emphasize on our program that context is always key, especially when it's a soundbite from anybody, specifically former President Trump, as he's often taken out of context. Was this Trump using the bully pulpit, if you will, to pressure NATO to pay up? And do you think if President Trump wins the election, would he or should he ultimately make NATO member countries pay their fair share?
I don't
We
see
all know
why
how
not.
Donald Trump operates, and he's at his best when he gets people to do things they never would have agreed to otherwise. The whole world is talking about NATO and defense spending. And Donald Trump was the first president to go over there and say, you got to put in your 2%. And as you heard in his tenor and tone and his facial expressions when he said that entire quote, he's talking about forcing NATO and any additional NATO countries that come in to pay their fair share. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, they used to use the United States of America as a piggy bank, not just for the UN, but also for NATO. And European countries are now upset that they have to pay a little bit of money into the kitty for their own self-defense. Remember, that's what NATO's talking about, right? Majority of the money spent in NATO is for European defense measures, for European countries, funded by the United States of America. And Donald Trump wanted to halt that. And most Americans agree with that. So I think it was an appropriate statement, and yet another example of the mainstream media chopping up a quote for a disinformation narrative.
Speaking of funding, Cash, President Biden pushing Congress for more aid to Ukraine. He's also publicly rebuked Israel for its war against Hamas terrorists after the October 7th attacks. I want to play some more sound and get your reaction.
I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in the Gaza Strip has been over the top.
Cash, is Biden's comment there stoking the flame of anti-Israel rhetoric, both on Capitol Hill and on college campuses and other settings? That's basically setting the stage for Senate Democrats to ultimately oppose any Israel funding, separate funding to appease pro-Hamas sympathizers.
That's
Yeah,
exactly what he's
not
doing.
surprising that the mainstream media is not covering that statement from the current commander-in-chief, who is making a political football out of the two world wars that were created on his watch. Of course, they want to continue to endlessly fund the Ukraine and provide almost no money to the Israeli efforts who are being attacked mercilessly by the number one state sponsor of terror. Oh, and by the way, there's still hostages over there, some of which are American citizens. And I think he is just doing what Washington always does, bending the knee to the defense industrial complex. They are the biggest players in the political landscape. This is why you see so many politicians on Capitol Hill coming out and saying we have to fund the Ukraine. The Ukraine is not the number one national security mission of the United States of America. And these people in Congress and Joe Biden are treating it as such. And that, I think, in my opinion, is not the way to best serve our country. And I think many Americans agree with that.
Cash Patel, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Hey, thanks. Have a great day.
And coming up, social media buzzing over what President Biden did and didn't do on Super Bowl Sunday. What did the president say about inflation, and why didn't he sit down for a halftime interview? We tell you about the backlash and how the White House is responding.
It would appear that I was right in my thought yesterday when the shooting happened at the church in Joel Osteen's church. The woman had "Free Palestine" written on the weapon. I was correct in that thought. I don't know if any mainstream media has reported that, but I heard it on the channel that I watch. So it is another jihad on religion. And that's got to come to an end. My Lord.
Shortly before 2 p.m. local time on Sunday.
She was armed with a long rifle and a trench coat with a backpack, accompanied by a small child, approximately 4 to 5 years old. Once she entered, at some point she began to fire.
Houston Police Chief Troy Finner said 2 off-duty officers present killed the shooter before she could kill anyone inside the church, which was preparing to hold a service. Finner said 2 people were injured, including the child who was with the shooter. Officials said they are working to understand the child's relationship to the shooter.
officer and agent engaged, striking the female. She's deceased here on the scene. Unfortunately, a 5-year-old kid was hit and is in critical condition at our local hospital.
A man in his 50s sustained a non-critical leg injury and was being treated at a local hospital. The identity of the shooter has not yet been released. Police said she claimed to have a bomb and sprayed an unknown substance on the ground. No explosives were found upon searching her backpack and her car. Eyewitnesses described hearing gunfire and watching people flee the church auditorium.
They were repetitive, boom, 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 and I yelled, "Mom!"
But then there are the second shot, they start to say the people to move from the auditorium.
Televangelist Joel Osteen, the senior pastor at the church, thanked police officers and first responders, saying that things could have gone a lot worse.
We were in between services going into the Spanish service, so, you know, if there's anything good of it, you know what, she didn't get in there and do a whole lot worse damage. So we thank God for that. He's watching over all of us.
Police are investigating the motive behind the attack.
According to police, the words "Free Palestine" were written on the shooter's gun. And now we're going to maintain, gain, and expand. That's the message from the Texas border czar, Mike Banks, as the
U.S. General Anthony McAuliffe to surrender. McAuliffe simply replied, "Nuts," a single word that would enter U.S. military folklore. Now a museum in southern Belgium has restored the headquarters formerly home to the 101st Airborne Division.
And now those cellars are accessible again to the audience, to the public. So it's very important. We really wanted to keep the place as it was, like in 1944.
The renovation is part of an exhibition celebrating the 80th anniversary of the battle. Andrew Burnell lived in Bastogne during the battle.
I was 13, and when you're 13, what do? You're bored during the holidays, and you dig around and wander everywhere looking for souvenirs of the battle, which had just finished. That's how by chance my brother and I found the cabin of a plane in Chenonneau Woods.
German forces initially took the Allies by surprise in the attack, their last major offensive of the war. U.S. forces lost roughly 19,000 troops.
We found a big packet of papers, 25 by 25 centimeters, and they were photos. There were about 180. And so we were able to find out that those photos were the whole battlefield of Bastogne, which was photographed by this plane at midday on December 25th.
For Belgians, the Bulge is a testament to the sacrifice made by U.S. soldiers to liberate Western Europe.
Making him the oldest person to fly the aircraft, and he has a special mission.
A museum in Belgium remembers one.